The morning light in Ashford Creek had a way of softening everything. The cracked sidewalks, the leaning mailboxes, even the ghosts of history that lived in the red dirt. Naomi Carter stood in her small kitchen, stirring coffee in a chipped blue mug that read, "Words change worlds." The phrase had long since faded, but she liked that about it. The fading made it feel earned. She took a slow sip, watching the steam curl toward the ceiling fan that groaned as it spun, whispering like an old friend. Her apartment was simple: stacks of books, yellowed photographs, and a worn leather satchel resting near the door. On the fridge hung a note written in looping handwriting. "Don't forget Malik's shop opens at 9. Bring pie." A smile flickered on her face. Her younger brother never stopped reminding her that family came before grading papers. She slipped in her jacket, collected a few essays from the table, and the world outside swallowed her calm. The streets were quiet except for the distant hum of an old pickup truck and the scent of honeysuckle rising from the fields. Naomi's car, a dented gray Corolla, coughed awake, and the radio filled the air with a gospel song she half sang, half prayed to. At the first red light, she caught her reflection in the rearview mirror. Her eyes were kind but tired, not with age, but with the quiet weight of always needing to prove she belonged where she stood. At Ashford Creek High, the day began with its usual symphony. Lockers slamming, sneakers squeaking, a bell that sounded more like a sigh. Students spilled into the hallway, laughing, shouting, alive with energy Naomi had always admired. Her classroom was different, an island of calm. Quotes lined the walls: Maya, Baldwin, Morrison. She'd painted them herself, late one night with a brush and too much coffee. Her favorite one, the one over the blackboard, read, "You can't hate the roots of a tree and not hate the tree itself." Her students arrived one by one, faces lit B. Naomi began the lesson with her usual warmth. "We're talking today about To Kill a Mockingbird," she said, "about what justice means when the law itself feels crooked." A few heads lifted. "Tell me, who decides what's right in a place that's wrong?" The room grew thoughtful, except for Evan, who leaned back in his chair. "Depends who's telling the story," he muttered. His friends laughed. Naomi caught the sound, steadying her breath before speaking. "Exactly," she said gently. "That's why stories matter, because sometimes they're the only way truth survives." By lunchtime, her desk was stacked with essays. She ate an apple while grading, smiling at the hopeful clumsiness of teenage writing. Words like freedom and justice were underlined in bright ink. Every so often, she'd pause and glance out the window, across the field where the American flag swayed above the gym, its edges frayed. The sight always stirred something quiet and unresolved in her. After school, Naomi stopped by Malik's garage. The smell of motor oil and jazz spilled from the open bay doors. He was under the hood of a car, grease on his cheek, humming to Coltrane. "Hey, Teach," he grinned. "You still fighting dragons with words?" She laughed. "Someone has to." He handed her a slice of pecan pie wrapped in foil. "For fuel," he said, "in case you forget that sweetness still exists." That night, Naomi sat at her desk by the window, lesson plans spread before her, the cicadas humming in rhythm with her thoughts. For a moment, the world felt almost peaceful. She didn't know yet that somewhere in that same town, a phone camera was capturing her. Her voice, her face, a recording that would twist her words, distort her grace, and set fire to everything she had quietly built. The night wind brushed the curtains. Her phone buzzed once, a notification she didn't check. The stars outside burned steady and far away, like promises not yet broken. Perfect, continuing seamlessly. Here is the next chapter of Naomi Carter's story. This section deepens the atmosphere, tension, and quiet hostility beneath Ashford Creek's polished surface. Morning came slow and heavy, the kind that pressed against the windows before letting the light in. Naomi's heels clicked softly through the school hallway, echoing against the locker doors painted a color that once pretended to be blue. She carried a calmness like a shield, though lately she'd felt the edges of that calm wearing thin. The air inside Ashford Creek High had changed. Not by much, just enough for her to notice. The greetings that once came easy. "Morning, Miss Carter." Now it came quieter, hesitating somewhere between respect and discomfort. Even the faculty lounge, once her refuge, carried new stiffness. Mr. Daniels, the history teacher, glanced at his phone instead of making eye contact. The principal's door was half closed. She brushed it all away with her usual grace. Years of being the only one in rooms full of smiles had taught her how to move through silence without letting it bruise her. By third period, she was standing before her class, the projector humming behind her. On the screen, a slide about the power of narrative. What we tell the world, she said, shapes what the world believes. That's why honesty matters, even when it's unpopular. Evan Miller raised his hand, his smirk rehearsed. So if someone disagrees with your kind of truth, that makes them dishonest? The class tensed. Naomi smiled, the kind that revealed nothing. Disagreement is healthy, Evan, but distorting facts? That's where honesty ends. He leaned back, pretending to think. Guess it depends who's writing the facts. The words hung in the air like smoke. His friends laughed, not loud but enough. Naomi didn't respond. She only looked at him long enough to make the laughter fade. Then she continued teaching, her voice unbroken. After class, she caught him filming near her desk. A quick motion, phone angled low, lens glinting under the fluorescent light. She said nothing, just met his eyes. His smirk faltered for a second, then returned, sharper. That night, the video appeared online. Cut and stitched together, Naomi's words about truth and history twisted into something mocking. The caption read, "Woke teacher thinks she's the hero in her own movie." The clip spread fast, first through students, then parents, then the town. Comments followed. This is what our taxes pay for. Always playing the victim. She needs to stick to English, not politics. By dawn, Naomi's phone was buzzing nonstop. Malik called first. "Naomi, you seen this mess?" Her voice stayed steady. "I've seen worse." But when she hung up, her hands trembled just slightly, coffee sloshing in the mug. At school, she walked through the doors as if nothing had changed. Yet everything had. The hallways buzzed with whispers that died when she passed. In the teacher's lounge, the conversation stopped cold. Someone's laptop was open. The video paused mid-sentence, her face frozen between words. Principal Hargrove called her into his office before lunch. His tie was crooked, his tone rehearsed. "Naomi, you know how proud we are of your work. But this video's stirred things up. The board's worried. Tom Miller's already called twice." She sat still, and he sighed, pressing his palms together. "Maybe take a few days off. Let things cool down. We don't want to add fuel." Her voice was quiet, but it landed like stone. "I didn't light the fire." "Of course not, but optics. Optics are what got us here." For a long moment, the only sound was the ticking clock above his desk. Finally, she stood, smoothing the crease in her skirt. "I'll keep teaching until I'm told otherwise." Outside, the sky had turned a strange, pale gray, the kind that made the town look smaller, older, unfinished. She could feel the weight of eyes on her as she walked back to class. Students avoided her gaze, except one, Aisha, the quiet girl in the back row who whispered, "Don't let them get to you, Ms. Carter." That whisper stayed with her the rest of the day. When the final bell rang, Naomi drove home through the narrow streets of Ashford Creek, past the courthouse with its Confederate statue still standing proud. The same flag she'd saluted as a child waved above it. She parked outside her apartment, sat behind the wheel, and finally let the silence fill her lungs. She didn't cry. She didn't break. She simply stared ahead at the reflection of her own face in the windshield and said softly, "All right then." The tone in her voice wasn't surrender. It was preparation. The sun had just edged past the horizon when Naomi Carter stepped into the light, unaware how quickly it would shift beneath her feet. On her way home from the small gathering at the school library, she got a call. Her brother Malik's voice, sharp, urgent. "Naomi, you better turn on the news channel." She pulled into the driveway of her apartment, her heart steady, though the muscles in her jaw clenched without her noticing. The television in the living room flickered as she entered. The anchor's tone was quiet but heavy. "Tonight, a teacher at Ashford Creek High School is under review." Naomi sank onto the couch, the pecan pie foil still in hand. The video had gone viral faster than she'd ever imagined. But what followed was unexpected, an on-screen panel of local civic leaders dissecting her words as if they were evidence of guilt. One spoke of divisiveness in the classroom. Another asked whether taxpayer dollars should support someone promoting an agenda. The image of her in the assembly, the award she had received just weeks ago, flashed beside the grainy clip of the edited playback. Within hours, the school board sent a formal letter of suspension. The grounds, conduct unbecoming of the teaching profession. At her classroom door the next morning, a small yellow slip awaited her. The administration's contact, human resources. She didn't raise her voice when she gathered her things. She simply clicked shut her laptop, the screen's glow humming in the otherwise silent room. Students watched from the hallway. Evan Miller passed by her with a smirk. He didn't speak. The bell rang. She walked out without looking back. The hum of the fluorescent lights was louder than usual on her way out. Later that afternoon, she sat in HR's dreary office. Beige walls, a low hum of the air conditioner, no windows. One question after another. Did you purposefully influence students with your personal activism? Can you explain this photograph of you at an outside protest? Naomi answered each calmly, each time returning to the fact. She teaches literature. She encourages critical thinking. Nothing more. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't break her silence. She leaned into restraint like armor. But the retaliation did not stop there. Social media lights up. Posts surfaced about Naomi's past. Years ago, she had been part of a BLM march in a neighboring city. A blog driver cited her in the comments. She brought politics into our classrooms. Real estate agents in Ashford Creek quietly advised clients, maybe avoid that part of town. Her brother's auto shop received defaced flyers quoting her lesson turned caricature. A parent filed a formal complaint. My daughter was made to feel guilty about her race. Naomi walked through town that weekend, past the OL. She had been preparing for. The world expected her to stomp, to shout, to crumble. Instead, she sat still and let the storm gather. That night in bed, Naomi stared at the ceiling, the hum of the fan above mixing with her inner rhythm. She thought about the teacher she was before this all started, the hopeful one, the one who believed simply teaching was enough. She realized teaching was no longer just the lessons on literature. It was about what she represented. The viral video was a salvo, but also her invitation to rise. She inhaled deep. The room was quiet except for the tick of the clock. She did not fall asleep immediately. Instead, she planned. Tomorrow, she would walk back into that town, into that system, with her dignity intact and her mind sharpened. Because injustice had been done, but she would respond not with anger, but with purpose. The next morning came wrapped in the kind of silence that feels too heavy to be natural. The light through Naomi's blinds was cold, dull, the kind that didn't warm anything it touched. She sat at her kitchen table, laptop open, the glow of the screen painting her face in pale blue. For the first time in days, she wasn't reading the comments or the news feeds. She was searching something older, digital archives, cache files, fragments of who she used to be before this town ever knew her name. In a folder buried deep inside her computer, she found it. An old headline from the Washington Ledger. Reporter Naomi Carter uncovers police extortion ring in Baton Rouge. The photo beneath, it was of her, younger, sharper, eyes fierce behind wireframe glasses. She remembered that woman, the one who once believed that truth could change the world. That was before the threats, before the men who waited outside her apartment with blank faces and no badges. Before she left journalism behind and promised herself a quieter life. She had traded the chaos of a newsroom for the calm of a classroom, thinking she could do more by Shopee. "Morning, soldier," he said with a faint grin, pushing one cup toward her. She arched an eyebrow. "Haven't heard that nickname in years." "Yeah, well," he said, sitting opposite her. "You've been through enough battles to earn it again." He leaned forward. "You really think this kid acted alone? That video didn't get traction by accident." Naomi exhaled slowly. "No, it didn't." She turned the laptop toward him. On the screen were email headers, metadata, repost patterns, digital fingerprints. I traced the first shares, she said quietly. All the earliest reposts came from accounts tied to a PAC, one that's funding Tom Miller's campaign. Malik blinked, stunned. The school board guy? Naomi nodded. And Evan's father. The words hung between them. Outside, a lawnmower buzzed somewhere in the distance, the sound almost mocking in its normalcy. Naomi took a slow sip of coffee, the tremor in her hand gone now. Her voice turned steady, surgical. They wanted to silence me because I teach kids to question power. So now we question theirs. That evening, Naomi called an old contact, Renee Wallace, a national reporter at the Ledger, one of the few who still believed in her. Naomi Carter, Renee said on the other end, the sound of typing in the background. I wondered when I'd hear that name again. I think I got something, Naomi said, her tone calm but edged with quiet fire. And this time, it's personal. Send me what you have, Renee replied. If it checks out, we'll publish. Just like old times. Naomi smiled faintly, the first real one in days. Old times got me chased out of city. Then let's make sure this time they can't run. When the call ended, Naomi sat for a long moment, staring at the soft light of her laptop. Her heart was no longer heavy, it was awake. Every instinct she had buried as a teacher, her discipline, her investigative patience, her ability to see through noise, had returned. The next morning, she dressed differently. No blazer, no kerfelsofnis. She wore a charcoal sweater and simple jeans, clothes she could move in, think in, fight in. When she walked into the school office to clean out her desk, heads turned. Mr. Hargrove looked up from his paperwork, voice stumbling. Naomi, you don't have to. I know, she interrupted gently. But I do. She smiled, not with warmth, but with clarity. The kind of smile that says the storm you started is now under investigation. Later that night, her email pinged with a message from Renee. We've confirmed it. The accounts are tied to Miller's campaign committee. We're verifying everything for publication. Buckle up. Naomi closed the laptop and leaned back in her chair, eyes fixed on the ceiling. The hum of the streetlights outside filled the room. In that moment, she wasn't a victim of an online smear. She was a journalist again. A woman who had once dismantled corruption with nothing more than a pen, persistence, and courage. And though she knew the days ahead would be hard, uglier than before, there was a stillness in her chest that felt like purpose reborn. The kind that doesn't shout or demand to be seen. It simply waits, precise and patient, for the truth to do its work. By mid-morning, Ashford Creek felt different. The hum of the town's small routines, the post office, the diner, the corner gas station, was punctuated by the distant echo of car horns and camera shutters. Naomi walked through the streets with Malik at her side, their footsteps quiet but purposeful. The news had broken. Renee Wallace's report went live, and the evidence was irrefutable. Screenshots, metadata, email chains, and timestamps all pointed to the Miller campaign orchestrating the viral smear. Naomi's composed face stared from smartphones across town, her dignity intact even as the truth illuminated the darkness. In the high school, whispers shifted into conversations tinged with awe and disbelief. Teachers peeked from classroom doors, students huddled in small groups, pointing at their screens. The power dynamics that had weighed heavily for weeks now trembled in the wake of revealed evidence. Evan Miller's smug confidence faltered. His father's name was on every headline, every post, every TV segment. Local news vans lined the streets outside the school as reporters shouted into microphones, cameras rolling, the world watching. Naomi's own inbox flooded with messages, apologies from parents, students, colleagues, and former neighbors. One student wrote, "I always knew you were right. You never deserved this. Thank you for showing us what true courage looks like." Another sent a shaky video confession. "I helped share the video. I didn't know it would go this far." Yet the praise was intertwined with threats. Anonymous messages warned her to back down, calling her names, making it clear that power and privilege still lurked behind headlines. She read them silently, her expression unreadable, absorbing the venom without reaction. Malik, standing behind her, rested a steadying hand on her shoulder. "They're scared now," he said softly. "And scared people make mistakes." By the afternoon, Naomi found herself seated at the edge of a makeshift press area outside the courthouse. Cameras clicked, lights flashed, and the drone of microphones filled the air. Reporters from across the state had flown in. Naomi remained calm, answering each question with a measured tone that reflected both restraint and authority. "I didn't ask to be a symbol," she said. "I'm just a teacher who refused to let lies define her work. The students deserve the truth. That's all I've ever taught them." Her words resonated. Clips of her statement circulated faster than the original smear. Social media campaigns, once against her, now rallied around her. Hashtag #StandWithMSCarter trended nationally. Student. Even those who remained skeptical could not ignore the evidence. Emails, official documents, and digital trails showed coordination, intent, and malicious planning. Naomi had not needed to raise her voice or rally crowds. The truth had already begun to dismantle the facade of authority. By nightfall, she returned to her apartment, exhausted but unbroken. Malik was waiting, pie and coffee in hand. Outside, the distant sounds of chanting and camera drones painted a new landscape of accountability. Naomi leaned back in her chair, staring at the ceiling, absorbing the gravity of what had shifted. She thought about the students who had once whispered, "Don't let them get to you," and realized the ripple of one voice, sustained by dignity and restraint, could awaken an entire community. For the first time in weeks, Naomi allowed herself a quiet smile. The storm of deceit had begun to fracture. The power that had tried to silence her now faced daylight. And though the battle was far from over, the town, and perhaps the world beyond it, had begun to see that courage, strategy, and unwavering integrity could expose the rot beneath the surface. The night settled over Ashford Creek with a strange calm, one threaded with tension and hope. Naomi, seated at her desk with documents laid before her, felt the pulse of the coming days, intense, dangerous, but full of possibility. Justice was no longer a distant concept. It was alive, and she had lit its first flame. If you want, I can now continue with Section 6, Legal or Tactical Counterattack, where Naomi begins taking precise, strategic action against the Millers and the institutions that enabled them. This is where the story escalates toward the high-stakes confrontation. The morning sun struck through the blinds in Naomi's apartment, streaking the room with sharp lines of gold and shadow. She sat at her desk, surrounded by stacks of printouts, folders, and her laptop, the air humming with quiet intensity. Every detail. By noon, they had assembled a team. Renee Wallace for national media coverage, a couple of IT specialists to trace digital footprints, and legal researchers to verify every link, every account. The operation was silent, surgical. No dramatics, no grandstanding, just calculated, methodical preparation. Naomi reviewed each screenshot, each email, each forwarded post. Evan's father, Tom Miller, had left digital fingerprints on almost every platform, underestimating the precision and patience of a teacher who once exposed a police extortion ring in Baton Rouge. The legal filings were meticulous. Marcus drafted complaints citing defamation, civil rights violations, and misuse of public funds. Naomi supplied sworn statements, her calm voice echoing through every paragraph. The timeline of harassment, the viral smear, and the personal impact on her career, her students, and the community. Each word was measured, each point supported by evidence. There was no room for theatrics. The truth had to be undeniable. As the documents were submitted, Naomi began reaching out to the town's community leaders and her former students. She spoke with clarity and restraint. "This isn't about revenge," she told them during an online forum. "It's about accountability. Our children deserve a system that values integrity over intimidation." Her words, steady and unflinching, ignited discussion. Local parents, previously silent, stepped forward, offering testimony and corroborating accounts of how the smear had spread. The pressure on Miller escalated quietly but inexorably. Emails leaked to Renee revealed him coordinating with the school board to suppress complaints, manipulating student narratives and directing social media attacks. National outlets picked up the story, amplifying the scrutiny. Naomi's photo graced the front pages, not as a villain, but as the emblem of composure and intelligence under siege. The town, once quick to whisper and judge, now watched in awe as her rest dry. Even as threats continued in the background, Naomi's strategy forced the Millers into a corner. Public exposure, coupled with precise legal action, made evasion impossible. Every attempt to manipulate opinion, every smear intended to silence her, now fed into the narrative of accountability and courage. Late at night, she sat back in her chair, exhausted but resolute. The hum of streetlights outside her window was steady, a quiet reminder that the world outside was watching. Justice was no longer a distant hope. It was unfolding, and Naomi's intelligence, patience, and restraint had turned the tide. The battle for truth was moving from whispers and social media posts into the daylight of law, media, and public awareness. She exhaled slowly, the weight in her chest lifted slightly. This was not the end. Not yet, but the ground had shifted. The storm she had weathered was now a strategic force she could direct. The Millers had underestimated her, and that miscalculation would be their undoing. If you want, I can continue with Section 7. Climactic showdown, where Naomi faces the Millers and the system publicly, in a tense courtroom and town hall confrontation, pushing the story toward its emotional apex. The courthouse steps of Ashford Creek were alive with tension. Cameras lined the sidewalks, drones hovered above, and reporters' microphones jutted toward anyone who would speak. The air smelled of late summer heat, asphalt, and the faint perfume of magnolia blossoms, yet it carried a weight far heavier than the season. Naomi Carter emerged from her car, the sun catching her hair, casting shadows on her determined face. She walked slowly, deliberately, each step measured as if marking a rhythm the town could not ignore. Around her, students, neighbors, and supporters gathered quietly, holding signs, "Justice is courage," "Our teacher," "Our voice," their presence steady, dignified, and unyielding. Inside, the courtroom was packed, the wooden benches polished. Connecting the smear to Miller's campaign and the manipulation of students' accounts all unfolded with careful clarity. She didn't shout. She didn't cry. She let the truth speak with the weight of inevitability. Tom Miller's defense faltered under scrutiny. His lawyer attempted to frame the campaign's actions as innocuous social media activity, but Naomi countered with calm logic and corroborating evidence. She called forward students, parents, and teachers who testified quietly but powerfully, their words reinforcing her narrative. The courtroom, once tense and uncertain, began to shift. Murmurs of disbelief, awe, and recognition threaded through the rows. The Millers' authority, which had seemed untouchable, was unraveling thread by thread. After the legal proceedings, the confrontation moved to the town hall. Naomi stood before a sea of faces, cameras capturing every reaction. The room was electric with anticipation. She addressed the community, voice steady but infused with quiet fire. "You try to teach my students that cruelty wins," she said, scanning the crowd. "I'm here to remind them, and all of us, it doesn't." Her words carried over whispers and gasps, settling into every ear. The video of her town hall speech quickly went viral, unedited, unassailable. National media amplified the story. Local leaders who had remained silent could no longer hide. Questions were asked, accountability demanded. The Millers, now under the piercing gaze of truth and law, could only respond in faltering fragments. Naomi's strategy had forced every misstep into public view, exposing the corruption that had long lingered in the shadows of Ashford Creek. Outside, students cheered quietly, families embraced, and reporters captured the emotional intensity of a town witnessing its own reckoning. Naomi stepped aside for a moment, letting the tide of public attention flow, but her eyes remained focused, scanning the courthouse steps. Each child's gaze met hers, a silent A. Beneath her, the warm late afternoon light fell across her face, She allowed herself a moment of quiet satisfaction. The battle was won, but the lesson endured. Courage is silent, truth is precise, and justice, when sought with patience and intelligence, cannot be ignored. If you're ready, I can now write Section 8, Resolution and Transformation, giving the story its cinematic, emotional, and reflective conclusion, showing Naomi's personal victory, community change, and lasting legacy. Weeks had passed since the town had witnessed the unraveling of the smear campaign. Ashford Creek felt different, not entirely healed, but transformed in subtle, enduring ways. The courthouse steps, once echoing with tension and anticipation, now held a quieter dignity. Naomi Carter walked through the streets with her usual composure, though there was a lightness in her step that hadn't existed before. The town's air, once thick with judgment and whispered assumptions, now carried a sense of possibility, as though truth had cleared the haze that had long settled over it. Back in her classroom, Naomi's students returned to their desks, notebooks open, pens ready. They looked at her with newfound respect, not just for her lessons, but for her courage. The walls, once lined with quotes, now seemed to hum with their own energy, energized by the example she had set. She greeted them quietly, her smile soft but resolute. "Today," she said, "we start by talking about what it means to stand for what's right, even when it's hard." The students leaned in, aware that these weren't just words on a page. They were lessons lived, lessons witnessed, lessons that would echo long after they left this classroom. Naomi's phone buzzed intermittently. Messages of support, requests for interviews, invitations to speak at schools and forums across the state. Yet she approached each opportunity with the same careful discernment that had guided her through the crisis. This wasn't a moment for spectacle. Across Ashford Creek, the ripple effects of her actions began to take hold. The school board instituted new oversight measures to prevent abuse of power. Social media literacy workshops were added to the curriculum, and students formed clubs to discuss integrity, civic responsibility, and justice. Conversations that had once been hushed were now open, honest, and reflective. The town did not claim her courage, but it recognized it quietly and allowed itself to be reshaped in its wake. One evening, Naomi returned to her apartment, settling at her desk to grade essays. Outside, the cicadas sang, and the night air carried the faint scent of magnolia and honeysuckle. She paused, gazing at a photograph pinned above her desk. A younger version of herself, reporting under pressure, exposing corruption she had long since left behind. Her fingers traced the edge of the frame. The world had tested her, sought to diminish her, but the truth she had wielded with intelligence and restraint had endured. She stood, moving to the window. Across the street, children played under the last light of dusk, their laughter rising into the evening like fragile music. Naomi allowed herself a quiet smile. Justice, she understood now more deeply than ever, was not always loud. It was precise, patient, and persistent. It required courage, yes, but also strategy, restraint, and the unwavering belief that truth would outlast fear and falsehood. Before closing the window, she scribbled a phrase on the whiteboard at her desk, a final lesson for herself, her students, and perhaps the town that had both challenged and witnessed her. Dignity is not silence. It is grace that refuses to bend. The words lingered, luminous in the soft lamplight, as Naomi Carter leaned back in her chair. Outside, the town settled into night, changed not by force, but by the quiet, unyielding power of one woman who refused to let lies define her story. She exhaled, and for the first time in weeks, felt the weight.